I'm here to listen. Why am I walking on this way?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Muse's AT Podcast, where you can relive my epic journey with me. This is Muse, and what follows is my Appalachian Trail story. And in this episode, we are going to do 3 more pre-trail trail journal entries. We're going to do April 25th, May 2nd, and May 10th. So we left off last time in late March. We were talking about sort of early prep, and now we're getting into that whirlwind period that I was talking about. Some key events in this episode as I have my last day of work and Haley's college graduation. And today's haiku is from November 16th, 2024. In the chrysalis, the caterpillar dissolves. Nothing than beauty. Okay, a couple of things to define here for this episode. The first one that I've got within the entry there is I reference a day hike. A day hike is really if you just go out for a hike during the day. Like you're not actually planning on staying overnight anywhere, so you're not backpacking. You've just, maybe packed a lunch or something like that, and you're just hitting the trail, and you're basically going to go home after your hike. Next, I do talk about an outfitter. This isn't really trail specific necessarily, but an outfitter is basically a gear shop. The first 2 hostels I came to on trail each had an outfitter with them. And so in the entry, I talk about saving some purchases for the outfitter up in Maine. That would have been the Appalachian Trail hostel and outfitter. And also in that second entry, you're going to hear about my niece and her husband, Kara and Luke, trail names Honey Bun and Slingshot, on the Pacific Crest Trail. Now, the Pacific Crest Trail, the PCT, is one of the 3 main acknowledged long trails in North America, extending northbound from Mexico to Canada along the West Coast. And so this was kind of a little bit of a running joke between Kara and me. I would have crossed like 5-6 states before she got out of her first one, even though they moved a lot faster than me and started earlier. And all of that, of course, is because the first state going northbound on that trail will be California, which is going to be almost 2,000 miles from bottom to top, and also goes through Oregon and Washington before it finishes up. Along with the CDT, the Continental Divide Trail, the PCT and the AT make up what North American hikers call the Triple Crown. And the CDT, going from south to north, starts in the desert of New Mexico, goes up through the Rockies of Colorado, and then finishing up through Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana. And the last term that I want to kind of define here before we get into the entry, although I won't bring this up until the commentary, honestly, but I talked about leapfrogging, and I was talking about Shotgun Ratatouille and I leapfrogging each other, which is really just saying that one of us would hike ahead of the other and the other would catch up, maybe surpass, and then keep kind of jumping past each other that way. All right, with that, I think we've got all our terms down for today. On to those entries. April 25th, 2025. Last day of work. Pre-trail. On a day hike this past Saturday with my buddy Brandon. This day marks an important day in the prep for my hike. Today is my last day of work. I've worked at this company for a little over 6 years, and in that time I have met and befriended many great people, learned a ton of new skills, and had the wonderful opportunity here of autonomy and creative expression. 2 things that I have learned are core values for me. It is a strange day. Coming to this checkpoint along the prep journey, my excitement is running higher than it had at any other point. But I will miss people, the work, and the business. It's been a good gig. May 2nd, 2025. Untitled. Pre-trail. First week of semi-retirement in the books. The week started off great, as on Monday, Carrie and I got to see Haley's capstone presentation up at school, take in some of the others, and meet a few of her classmates from her major. It was awesome. Haley crushed it, and so did her friends. Then on Tuesday, I got to work. Some things around the house that could use some tidying up, some trail prep, some tidying up that really boiled down to being trail prep. The lines are pretty blurry now. Logged a couple of runs in the middle of the week on the way to some decent step counts, and, this one will seem overdue, started the Master Gear spreadsheet. Haley was home on Thursday, so we made a trip to REI to get the last few items. I have a couple of things earmarked for the outfitter up in Maine, but other than that, think we are done purchasing. Another important piece of prep. I collected my reading material for at least early trail and some pre-trail and loaded it onto my Kindle app on my phone. I want to be very intentional about my mindset and think this is an often overlooked but essential element of the preparation. In truth, I don't simply want to hike the trail, I want to fully embrace and enjoy the experience. The first title is the 30-Day Kindness Challenge by Shanti Feldhahn. A goal throughout the hike and before at home will be to be very intentional about spreading kindness. This is not completely unselfish. I believe this is the only way to embrace the right disposition to best experience life in general, and the main thing I want to do on trail is experience it fully. Next is Brené Brown's Atlas of the Heart. One place I've been putting extra effort over the past year or two is trying to properly name my feelings. I think if you can't fully articulate your emotions, then you don't really feel them fully. I've heard this book is very good for expanding that vocabulary, a noted growth area for me. And I just want to feel all the feels, or I'm leaving something important on the table. Lastly, the Enchiridion, the teachings of Epictetus, one of the main Stoic philosophers, for mindset and resolve. A couple of other cool highlights. Had an unexpected conversation with my friend Katrin from Dusseldorf, who will be finishing up a vacation in Maine just as we're flying in. Looks like we'll meet for some pie as we make our way up from Portland to Bangor. Airline goofiness / airport maintenance now has us flying to Portland on the 1st instead of our earlier plan of Bangor on the 2nd. That should be pretty cool. It will be great to see Katrin, and I'm excited for her to meet Haley. And I also just got an update from my niece Kara. She and her husband Luke set off on a northbound thru hike of the Pacific Crest Trail a couple of weeks ago. They are already in the LA area, so they are crushing some pretty big miles early on. And hitting blizzards in Southern California in May shows how unpredictable things can get once on trail. Important, though probably shorter, post next week with a key approach trail step coming up. Stay tuned. May 10th, 2025. Haley is now a college graduate. Pre-trail. Congratulations to my beautiful daughter and hiking partner. So proud of her. Haley's graduation is another important step on the approach trail. Now, nothing standing between us and Katahdin. Hey everyone, this is the part of the episode between the entry and the commentary where as the podcast develops, I'll drop in an ad or two to get the bills paid. Nothing too intrusive, hopefully, and maybe if we're lucky, we'll pick up some trail-related sponsors. At this point, though, I thought I'd write an ad of my own and read it out. What I'm selling today is simply a plea to get in touch with me. I'll say it in the body of some of the episodes, but probably sometimes I won't. But I really do want to connect. Not only would I love feedback, truly, and am itching to field a question or two, but I also would love to hear your trail stories. This podcast is my way, post-trail, of connecting back with the AT community. Whether you're reliving past glory like I am on this show, prepping for an upcoming hike, or maybe you're on the trail here in 2026, or maybe you're just someone who likes hiking content or in particular the Appalachian Trail, whatever brings you here, I'd love to get to know you. So reach out on Instagram by following Muse Hikes, or email me at museatpodcast@gmail.com. Or another cool way to get in touch, and I'll start getting back to checking this regularly, is to drop a note in my trail journal if you click through to that. The trail journal has pictures with each journal entry, and sometimes I'll refer directly to the picture in the entry as I read it out, so you might want to see that. And I'll also share some photos on that Instagram account as well. There are links to the Instagram profile, the email, and the trail journal in the show notes to each episode. Whichever way you decide to reach out, I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And now, back to the show. All right, in this episode, I kind of want to talk about post-trail. Episode 1, I framed up, at least very high level, on trail. Last episode, I went in a little more depth about pre-trail, but what about post-trail? One of the reasons I want to do this is my own conception of this podcast is that it's happening on two different timelines. Really, as I speak to you, I am in that post-trail period of this adventure. So for instance, right now, I'm really excited that at the end of next week, I'm going to be going to trail days in Damascus. And that would be a silly thing for me to leave out, right? So as we follow my on-trail journey, I'm also going to be giving you these post-trail updates as we go along as well, so that you kind of get the full picture of things. Before we talk about that, let's talk a little bit about these entries. So very first line in the April 25th entry there. On a day hike this past Saturday with my buddy Brandon. It's not even a full sentence, right? But, well, let's not talk about the quality of writing. Anyway, what's going on there is that's referring to the picture. An important thing to mention here is that if you click through from the show notes to my trail journal, you will always come to the entry for that. These multiple day ones, you'll come to the first entry of that day. Well, if you click through the show notes of this particular episode, you're going to come straight to that picture of Brandon and me, right? So that's what that line in my entry is describing, is just, it's kind of a caption is what's going on. We talked a little bit about work last time, so I don't think I'm going to talk. A lot of the April 25th was about work because that was my last day of work, but I feel like I kind of covered that in episode 2. So let's kind of scroll down real quick here. And I kind of jokingly said first week of semi-retirement. First week of sabbatical would have been probably a little more accurate. That entry starts describing a trip that Carrie and I took up to Chapel Hill, up to Carolina. By the way, I don't think I'd ever actually mentioned where Haley graduated. She graduated from Carolina, UNC Chapel Hill. So we went up there and we saw her capstone presentation and a couple of other capstone presentations, because it's a whole program that they had and you could go to different places. So that was pretty cool. And then, like I said, on Tuesday, I got to work. So I talked a little bit about how it was kind of, feet were almost up on the desk for a good 3 weeks there. And then, like, it just was game on, right? Well, then on Tuesday, I got to work. That is the beginning of the game on through to really until I landed in Maine. Then I talk about this reading material, and we'll come back to that. Like I mentioned before, I want to go into a little bit about what media I was consuming in general. These books that I loaded on my phone are going to be part of that, and we'll come back to that in a future episode, as I do want to kind of get into the post-trail experience this episode. A couple more things before we go there, though. One of the things I mentioned was this Master Gear spreadsheet. We're going to hit that next episode. Next episode is going to be really the last episode before we're at least traveling up to Maine. And that'll be a bit of fun to pop that open and just kind of scroll through and see what it is I was thinking gear-wise before I hit the trail. And then a couple mentions here. First, Katrin, who I mentioned in episode 1, and so you know that I'm already setting up effectively my first trail visit, that lunch that Haley and I had in Portland. And then also Kara and Luke, who were on the Pacific Crest Trail, overlapping with my Appalachian Trail adventure, which was really cool. Kara and I would just send some text messages back and forth every now and then just to check in. They also would periodically post Instagram reels, so I would kind of catch up with what they were doing on the PCT while I was out on the AT. And it was just really cool in general that their hiking adventure overlapped with mine. A little bit of groundwork that I need to lay as we're starting to talk post-trail is another way of framing up the on-trail time, right? So I framed it up 2 different ways back in episode 1, and that was enough for episode 1. We were just making introductions. I didn't want to go any further. But the way that I really need to frame up here so that I can accurately talk about post-trail is I need to talk to you a little bit about the evolution of my trail family. So, as I mentioned back there in the first episode, my trail family is called the Slowos. Sort of the combination of the idea that we were not necessarily going fast, but we were also Sobos, right? Southbound hikers. I'm going to start this frame up in sort of what I call my proto-Slobo trail family. And that's going to be a couple of guys that I met in New Hampshire, Ratatouille and Shotgun. And we hiked through 2/3 of New Hampshire, probably probably even more than that miles-wise. I joined up with these guys late in the White Mountains, right? And if you know anything about New Hampshire, and we'll get into it obviously a little bit later, but it starts off real tough. You're in the White Mountains. And then it's like actually super easy, right? So when I say 2/3 of the miles, it was probably also 1/3 of the time. But then I hung with them through all of Vermont. And Vermont took about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. I'm not sure. We'll obviously hit that. So I'm hanging out with Ratatouille Shotgun, and this was fun. We're like leapfrogging each other, just kind of. Sometimes I'm hanging, I'm at the shelter with Ratatouille and Shotgun, but both of them, Ratatouille and Shotgun. Sometimes I'm at the shelter with one or the other. Sometimes we're, catching up. I'm alone, but I'm catching up with these guys because they're at the next town. It was just kind of a fun dynamic, right? It was also kind of when the hike got a little bigger for me. It was very much, even though I was meeting people and I was enjoying meeting people, I was enjoying people in general, it was still a very solo experience up until this, right? But it was Ratatouille in particular who got me into the Instagram group. We'll get into that. Got me in touch with a lot of other, especially southbound hikers like myself. And so I've kind of now felt like I was in this network, like of people who were all doing this thing together, both in the fact that I'm now hiking with these two guys and I'm now connected with more people. An important note of those sort of proto-Slobo days was Ratatouille, which you'll come to know pretty quickly here. Ratatouille is really my best friend on trail. Very quickly got a fairly deep connection with him, and that started from sort of day one at the very end of the Whites, all the way through to Springer Mountain and beyond, right? Which is why he was at my house doing an interview with me back in February that I'll air next Friday. In those proto-Slobo days, Ratatouille was like, I really want to catch up with Utag and Silly Putty. And this was kind of like his main focus, which was cool. I had met Utag and Silly Putty. I thought they were cool. Like I was cool with that. I didn't have much of a connection with them yet. He did though, because he had hiked with each of them separately for a time back in Maine. And it was cool because when we caught up, that was really when the Slobos formed. So this actually happened the day after I visited Fernando. I had mentioned I visited Fernando as soon as I crossed over to Massachusetts. And so I was a little behind the group because I'd had this sort of off-trail experience with a buddy that I met in the 100-mile wilderness. As soon as I got back on trail, Ratatouille got in touch with me. He's like, Muse, you need a push. You need to get to Cheshire and meet us. Got to Cheshire. It's Silly Putty, Ratatouille, and Crooked Letter, right? Who I was then just meeting for the first time. That's the four of us. We formed the Slobos. I think the name Slobo was actually Silly Putty's idea, and that's what we called ourselves. And then we hiked the rest of Massachusetts together. And then there ended up being a little bit of a fragmenting, right? Which was an interesting time, although we kept in touch through that time, right? So it was still kind of cool. It was still very connected. But we ended up really in 3 groups of 2 for a little bit. I actually caught up with Utag in Connecticut right before crossing over into New York, and I added him into the group chat, which made him, now he's a Slobo, right? That's kind of what kind of defined it, especially in those early days. Like you're in the group chat, now you're a Slobo. So added him in, so we now have a 5th Slobo, and the only reason I ever caught Utag's a beast. I'll go ahead and just give him those props right here. I would have never caught him, except he was waiting for Ratatouille. So he's waiting for Ratatouille. I catch and pass Utag. I go into New York. They come into New York. They actually go into New York City, and that's where Carrie and Haley, who had come in to visit me, met Ratatouille and Utag for the first time. That was Labor Day weekend, and Silly Putty had also come off trail Labor Day weekend, but while she was off trail, she actually hurt herself. This is when Silly Putty injured her ankle. And so then she had to come off trail shortly after that. She ends up getting back with her buddy, Foggy Froggy, who had come off trail earlier for a family reunion. And then they together skipped ahead a little bit. They had done a lot of the trail in 2024, so they skipped ahead into Virginia. So you've got 2 pairs, Ratatouille and Utag, Silly Putty, Foggy Froggy. And then the third pair was really myself and Crooked Letter. Crooked Letter did not come off trail over Labor Day weekend, so he was now a little bit ahead of me. And he remained a little bit ahead of me, but just a little bit, through really all of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. And then when we joined up, we hiked a lot of Virginia together. We all ended up coming together again right around Thanksgiving. And it would then be 7 of us that got together for Thanksgiving. Utag and Ratatouille had met Margot Polo, and Silly Putty and Foggy Froggy had met Timber. I, in the meantime, had parted ways with Crooked Letter. He got a little bit ahead of me on trail. And so that makes 7, the 2 groups of 3, and me. And this was right at Hot Springs, North Carolina. After a great Thanksgiving reunion, we hiked the rest of the way to Springer together, meeting Huck in the very last week of the hike to make 8 of us that all finished together. Okay. Why that's important to lay that groundwork, keeping up with the Slobos especially, has really defined a lot of my post-trail. We've actually had a couple of Zoom calls where we just kind of catch up and everything, and how's everybody doing now? Most people are working again. We're all back in the real world. A couple of other updates. Utag has gotten really into birding. He's sending us really awesome bird pictures that he bought a nice camera, but he also took a class on how to use it and everything. So he's got these awesome pictures that he's sending. Ratatouille, actually, so he's a North Carolinian like I am. He had to go out to California because that's where he was living right pre-trail, get all his stuff loaded up in a car, and he actually made that a road trip where he hit a bunch of national parks on the way from California back to North Carolina. That was the context where he's further out towards the coast. I'm more towards western North Carolina. So he actually stopped at my house on the way home. And that's when we got the interview that you guys are going to get next Friday. Actually, a cool update with Ratatouille. As I record this episode 3, he's on the Scotland Trail. And so already enjoying his next big adventure. And I had mentioned early in this commentary that I am going to Trail Days next weekend, which is going to be awesome. So Trail Days in Damascus is a hiker festival that is always the weekend after Mother's Day in Damascus, Virginia, which is often going to be, I mentioned at one point earlier that most people do the trail northbound. It's also kind of a sweet spot timing-wise, which is why the festival is timed when it is, I'm sure, that a lot of those northbound hikers that are on trail in 2026 will be there, right? So I'm looking forward to meeting them as well. I'm also looking forward to seeing some of my friends. Some of the Slowbos that I was just talking about earlier this episode, Silly Putty and Foggy Froggy will be there. Crooked Letter, I think, will be there. I'm not absolutely 100% sure about Crooked Letter, but I think he'll be there as well. And then some other folks that we're definitely going to be talking about. Daddy Longlegs, Frogger, Pastor Frank, I believe they're all going to be there, and might see Shotgun as well. So excited to kind of catch up with my Sobo crowd from 2025, and then meet 2026's northbound hiking crew as well. And let's talk career again for just a couple minutes here, because one of the things I always envisioned was that the thru hike would be a little bit of a career pivot. So the vision was that I would do finance consulting, having been a finance guy for 20 years, plenty of experience, and a good skill set to go into consulting and make a good impact and kind of have a bit of freedom for myself. And some of that freedom would be that I wanted to do some creative endeavors on the side. Now, of course, you're listening to that creative endeavor now, right? That is this podcast. I didn't know at the time that was going to be a podcast. I didn't go into the hike knowing that I would want to podcast about it afterwards. That was an inspiration that hit me on the trail from a couple of different sources, as you heard in episode 1. So one of the reasons I bring that up, not only just to kind of keep you up to date, but also that I think that was very helpful for me to have a clear vision of what post-trail was going to look like. And also, I knew, now I didn't know my creative endeavor was going to be an AT podcast, and I didn't know I was going to use basically the AT in my branding for my consulting business either, as I do. But regardless, I knew that finishing a thru hike was going to be key to this vision that I had in my head, right? So I don't know if that sounds a little strange or whatever, but that I think was very, very important. A couple other key aspects or maybe updates for post-trail. So obviously reintegrating into my family. Unlike a lot of people who are hiking the Appalachian Trail, I'm coming back home to a wife and 2 kids. Well, the 2 kids don't live at home anymore. Evan's in college. Haley is post-college. Actually, she's in between undergrad and grad school. So she came off the trail. She went to work. And she's been working for a solid year and has just recently committed to NC State. So she'll be going off to grad school. So that's cool. But either way, they're out of the house. So it's a lot of good quality time with my wife. Also, we had a family vacation in there back in March. We did a week at Cocoa Beach. That was awesome. I actually even have been doing a little bit of traveling with work, and that travel put me down in Florida. So then I almost did like the sort of thru hiker thing and did a lot of public transport to get across the peninsula to go over to Cocoa Beach. And I decided to, piece together buses and shuttles, and I had to throw a couple of Uber rides in between there to make it all work together. But it was kind of my own little adventure there. But that was really cool seeing everybody in Cocoa Beach. Actually, the one person I didn't mention is Evan's girlfriend, Dylan, right? And I mentioned her for two reasons. She was one of my most avid readers while I was on trail, so that's great. But also she was on that vacation with us, and so it's been good to see her actually a few times now. See Evan and Dylan, and also Haley comes home fairly often as well. So a little bit of the kids are in and out, but that's what family life kind of looks like. And just very recently, as I'm recording, just earlier this week, actually, it'll be 2 weeks ago as of when this airs, Carrie and I made a trip up to St. Louis to see some family. My in-laws are from St. Louis, so that was great to see family, and we have that trip as well. Not to mention, actually, Christmas was in St. Louis, which is actually really significant because that was kind of my first couple days off trail. I came off trail and I caught up with a lot of people, especially that I had met on trail, to say, hey, I finished, and gave them the photo of, the 8 of us finishing together. And that was awesome. But then very quickly, we were making the trip up to St. Louis. And that was cool too, because it was reuniting with the bigger family. And I had just done this big thing, right? So that was pretty cool to talk to people about, including, of course, Karen and Luke, who had just had a similar experience on the other side of the continent. So I didn't take that in order. I kind of did that almost backwards, be honest with you. But that catches us up to the present here in 2026. So going forward, you can follow me along both timelines, as we mentioned earlier. So next episode on Monday is going to be the last time pre-trail that we do multiple entries. And that's going to cover May 30th, 31st, and June 1st. The Trail Journal starts daily entries starting on May 30th, going all the way through December 18th. So we're going to start taking this day by day after today, really. All right, excellent. This has been Muse, and you've been listening to Muse's AT Podcast. Thank you for walking with me, and happy trails.
Listen.